Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. And I am so glad to see you. Even though I can't see you, but I'm glad that you're here. This is very important that we understand what's going on because we live our lives and we have to live our life in truth and reality. And also, we need to realize that we are here for a reason. We have a purpose in life and we have to live for the future. And we are continuing our book, The Valley of the Dry Bones, the condition that faced Black people in America. Believe me, we are unique. We are living in America. And all the things that Black people have been through in this country, it is like none other. We have survived through a lot of trauma. And this next uh, chapter is going to be about the Black political struggle after the Civil War background. Now that's strange, that word Civil War. It's amazing how they just use words. Civil? I didn't see anything civil about that war. The principal issues that led to the secession of of the Southern states in the Civil War was states' rights, the tariff, slavery, and the struggle between the Democrats and Republicans for control of Congress. During the period between 1790 and 1860, the Democrats controlled the federal government for 50 years out of 70. During this period, the Democratic Party was the party of slaveholders. Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party freed the slaves and began to give them civil rights. Now, a lot of people, when those Republicans always want to bring out, well, you Democrats, y'all the one that enslaved slaves. Excuse me? We was catching hell from both sides. Okay? So, perhaps it is more proper to say that the blacks freed themselves with the help of God. The Civil War started in 1861, and in the early stages of the war, the Union Army suffered several major defeats. The Second Battle of Bull Run was a major Union disaster. The Second Battle of Bull Run was a major, oh shoot, I'll read it again. Uh, the Second Battle of Bull Run was a major Union disaster. Defeats like this one motivated Lincoln and others to recruit blacks into the military service, a move that up to this time the men in power had resisted. The industrial might of the North and the flower of white manhood could not alone win the Civil War for the Union of the United States. This fact is confirmed by Abraham Lincoln himself. When requested in the year 1864 to give up the use of black soldiers, Lincoln declared, "Take from us and give to the enemy," and 130, 40, or 50,000 colored persons now serving us as soldiers, seamen, and laborers, and we can no longer maintain the contest of the war. Now, even after that, they still wanted to stop the black soldiers. See what I mean? They are so two-faced. They give you something, then take it back. Now they let them start fighting in the war, and then a week two later, no, we don't need them. We don't want them. We don't need them. And that's really, that is really something. Let me see. It was something I wanted to. Now it's mighty strange that this book says that without, listen, that's why you have to really do research, because in this book it said that it would have been hard for them to win without the colored troops. But in this other book, I was looking up Civil War, and it said that the Union consisted of 23 million people. That's like in the North. And the Confederate only had 9 million. So one must wonder why they decided to let the colored troops come in, even though they had more people. Okay. I just found that pretty interesting. History demonstrates that most wars fought by the United States could not have been won except with the help of God, functioning through the unwavering loyalty and supreme sacrifice of the black man. After contributing his body, sweat, toil, tears, souls, minds, and blood for the development and security of this nation, the black man has still not acquired complete social and civil rights, but is slapped in the face every day. The trends indicate that he is on the verge of losing some of his civil rights he has gained. I shall deal with this point more fully later in this chapter. Now, we see a little bit this going on, and we've seen it. We have seen it over and over and over. They give you a little bit and then take it back. Give you a little bit and take it back. How can you get ahead like that? The transitional objectives. After the defeat of the slaveholders during the Civil War, the main objective of the federal government under the leadership of the Republican Party can be outlined as follows. 1. The formation of a huge relief bureau to support the immediate needs of the ex-slaves. 2. The compensation of the lands of the slaveholders and their transmission to the blacks and poor whites. 3. The deliverance of complete political, social, and economic rights to poor whites. 4. The reorganization of the political climate of the defeated Southern states in such a way as to guarantee political domination by the blacks and the poor white masses, and to make it impossible for the return of political power to the ex-slaveholders. The hypocrisy of Andrew Johnson and the Northern Democrats. Before the blood had dried completely on the battlefield, evil forces of the Democratic Party in the North and the South had united and were at work trying to undermine the preclude any black political control in the South. The chief leader of these Democrats was President Andrew Johnson himself. Johnson was a Southerner. Having been born in North Carolina, he moved to the state of Tennessee, where he held quite a few political offices. By the time the Civil War began, he had already served in the House of Representatives, had been elected to the United States Senate. When the South seceded from the Union, the Southern politicians walked out of the Senate, and Johnson was the only Southerner to remain there. When Lincoln became president, he appointed Johnson military governor of Tennessee. When President Lincoln ran for a second term, the Republican Party drafted Andrew Johnson as Lincoln's vice president. Lincoln and Johnson won the election on the Republican ticket, but Johnson never became a Republican. Finally, Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, and Johnson became the Democratic president, although he had been elected on the Republican ticket. Wow. I'm telling you, they slick. That just goes to show you they could do whatever they want to do. And it's up to us to stop that. Yo, you're not doing whatever we got to abide by the rules. You have to abide by the rules too. Now, how we make that happen, we shall see. When Johnson became president of the United States, he immediately said, treachery must be made infamous, and traitors must be punished and impoverished. This statement led many, especially the radical Republicans, Charles Sumner, Thaddeus Stevens, and others, to believe that Johnson intended to deal harshly with the rebels. Pushing the rebels was the precise intention of the radical Republicans. But Johnson's harsh statement on the rebels was nothing but a smokescreen to conceal his true desire: the restoration of ex-slaveholders to power, and to throw his opposition in Congress off guard. That's what they do. It's happening right now. You got everybody so fixated on this American administration that they're not seeing what's going on, what's really going on. Time has proven this fact to be true. Moreover, his subsequent deeds and actions testified against him and against the Democratic Party, north and south of the Mason-Dixon line. Within 3 months, President Johnson came into conflict with Congress. He made complete about-face, asserting that the Southern states had never been out of the Union, that the power to reconstruct the South belonged to the president and not to Congress, and that there must be lenient terms for the rebelling states. Just 6 weeks after the assassination of Lincoln on May the 29th, 1865, President Johnson issued the Amnesty Proclamation, which said all persons who have participated directly or indirectly in rebellion, save certain groups, would have all their rights and properties, except the ownership of slaves, restored to them upon taking a loyalty pledge. Those not pardoned included Confederate government officials of the South, or those that deserted from military, judiciary, congressional, and civilian posts, or those who had brutalized black soldiers, or those who had an annual income of $20,000 or more, who had been involved in the rebellion. This list only included a relatively small group of rebels. Although Johnson's proclamation stated that Confederate officials would not be pardoned, he gave many of them an indirect pardon. This was achieved in this manner. Many of the top officials of the South were never brought to trial, including Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, and Alexander Stephens, the Vice President. In retrospect, it is obvious that Johnson and his supporters intended to reduce the black man to a status of semi-slavery, which became known later as peonage or sharecropping, and to pardon the ex-slaveholders so that they could hold public office in the South in congressional seats. Johnson sought to keep the black man in a state of semi-slavery by returning the big plantations to the planters instead of dividing up the plantations and distributing them to the black man. 40 acres and a mule. This dire situation kept the black man destitute, landless, weak, with no place to go but to remain on the plantations. Living under a hostile yoke of the slave masters to be exploded to the highest degree. Again, Johnson pardoned the rebels in order to enable the ex-slaveholders to sit in local, state, and federal governments, rendering them political power over the helpless blacks. After Andrew Johnson established all-white state governments in the South, although 4 million blacks lived in these states, the white Southerners enacted black codes. Because of the stringency of these laws, many Northerns believed that their aims were to keep the black man in a status of involuntary servitude, if not actual slavery. Blacks could not function as preachers without a license. They were not permitted to carry firearms. The blacks could not serve on juries, nor could they vote. They were denied the choice of approaching whites unasked, and they could not own land. Any white man, rich or poor, could arrest a black man. And you wonder, why would somebody live under those conditions? That's a good question. Severe work rules were enacted. Black laborers became known as servants, irrespective of sex or whether they worked indoors or outdoors. And the employers were known as masters. Employers could flog a laborer under 18 years old and older laborers by the mandate of a judge for the violation of working sites before the termination of their contract. They could be arrested and all costs charged against them. In the spring and summer, they worked from 12 to 16 hours a day. When slavery was abolished and the Civil War came to an end, the free men left the plantations to look for work in other places to find scattered members of their families. New regulations sought to discourage this movement. Blacks were required to go to sleep at an early hour. Laborers who were missing from their jobs were fined. The amount was double their wages. If anyone ran away from his work, he could be arrested and hired out to other master employers. This was the beginning of a horrible peonage and sharecropping system in the South. This is really true because I've seen people talk about it that lived it. Like what's her name? Hanny Mae, oh, I forgot her name. Hammer. Wow. The concept was to bind the black man to the plantations like an inmate in a penal institution, as was accomplished under slavery. Why don't our black brothers and sisters realize that? You out there committing crimes and you are just continuing this concept of a plantation. When they arrest you and you get time, you're doing exactly what they want, keeping you on a plantation with no rights at all. When you are arrested, all your rights are taken, except for the rights that they give you as a right to a lawyer. When Congress convened in December of 1865, the vast majority of the senators and congressmen from the rebellious southern states stood in the halls of Congress to appeal for their seats. The audacity of these ex-slaves master is manifested by the fact that the new representatives of the notorious South were 4 Confederate generals, 6 Confederate cabinet officers, 5 colonels, 58 Confederate congressmen, and Alexander Stevens, the vice president of the Confederacy. Although President Johnson had organized the South, became its chief benefactor, and brought Southerners to the doors of Congress, his powers ended here. Only Congress itself had the authority to admit new representatives. The Northern Borgias and the radical Republicans were confronted with the serious problem. There was a possibility that the ex rebels would again get control of the Congress with their Democratic allies in the North. And this was a continuation of the pre-war contest for power between the masters and industrialists of the North and the tremendous reinforce of the Democratic Party. The radical Republicans reasoned that if Johnson's scheme was allowed to proceed without a challenge, the entire Civil War would have been in vain. At this time, 2 prominent Republicans stood up and spoke out for the true democracy and for the black man. Okay. Well, we're going to stop there. This book is really interesting, and this is a lot of stuff that we can look up. And my comment was this: I wish we would have went rogue and secluded ourselves in woods or mountains and just reinvent ourselves and regain a collective mind, focus on paths to make a better future for our children. We didn't need kids. I even said after being so-called let free, we shouldn't have never had children until we got ourselves together. And we didn't need kids born here unless they had plans to vacate this stolen land. We should have been preparing ourselves to lift up kings and queens and chieftains and leaders ventured out to find like minded people that accepted our goals. It was some other races that were in line with us, like some poor whites. And but see, like I said before, we was learning to read, but we should have been learning how to read between the lines. You see how they get up and maneuver stuff around? They're good at chess. That's what they play. They play in games with our lives. And we got to learn how to play the game. And we're going to have to get a game of our own. And we have to find ones that will accept our goals and our growth and education in this nation. We should have been building and constructing. We should have been learning medicine and holistic living and learning skills to maintain their society. No children born until complete citizenship is fulfilled. And we should have never believed nothing the European told us. That was our first mistake. And we should have been struggling with, we should have learned how to struggle with the mental illness from being enslaved all those years. And we should have been healing from the pain of seeing family members killed and raped and sold away. Really. If we could not do this, we should have never brought no kids into this stolen blood led land. That's my say. I know I'm saying it now, and really, I'm all right with it. I'm all right with it, honestly. If I had never been born, I'm all right with it, but I can't say that because I am, and I'm here, and I've lived too long to worry about that. But we should have never ever brought no kids into this world, in this land, on this land, for them to misuse. How many of our kids have been misused? All these years, denigrating them, making them feel less than. But that's me. That's how I feel. All right. Thank you for listening to me. I will be back later because the next one we're going to be talking about, the next chapter is the emergence of Black political strength in the South. And yes, they were. There was more people, Black people in Congress than it is now. All right. Thank you for listening. You all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Appreciate you. Great. Reading The Valley of the Dry Bones.